So Professor Ha has been studying late coming nations, Korea, Japan, Russia, China, the Soviet Union, and Russian Far East, Korean domestic and international politics. Also his impressive education, Seoul National University, Korea, bachelor's degree, 1971, Kent State University, master's in 1977, and a PhD from University of California at Berkeley in 1985. And so with that, I also wanted to say that he's teaching several courses. One of them is called the Korean Peninsula and World Politics. So full-time, actually, that's just one of about 5 courses you're teaching. Full-time job there. Thank you, Professor Ha. And would you like to share your screen?
Yes, I will. Yeah.
And you should be able to do it.
Yep.
And we'll take questions in the chat. So anybody that would like to ask questions, just put them in the chat and I will be able to read those off later.
Can everybody see the what I just shared?
Yes, that
Yes.
works fine.
All right. Okay.
Do you want to go up to slideshow and say play slideshow?
Okay. Yeah.
Go up where it says slideshow.
Yeah. I did. Should be working now.
Yes. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll put myself on mute as everybody else will while you're giving a while you're talking. So thank you everybody for putting your microphone on mute.
All right. Should I start?
Yes, go ahead, Professor.
Okay.
We're all here.
Yeah. Sorry for this technical difficulties since everybody was waiting. And also, I really thank you for inviting me to your council. Actually, I remember speaking at your council about 10 years ago. And so once again, it's my pleasure and honor to talk to you this evening. Actually, I was asked to originally speak about Korea-Japan relations, but then I thought about the topic. Also, I have been writing and speaking about the topic, but I thought with the new administration actually just sort of in power in South Korea, I thought the U.S.-South Korea relations should be more focus. Should be a focus. So also this year is a 70th anniversary of U.S.-South Korean military alliance. So I thought I would take this opportunity to reflect upon U.S.-South Korea relations for at least for the recent 20 years or 30 years. So with that, I would like to start my talk. Let me go to my PowerPoints here. Basically, before I start in detail, my overall the sort of talk will focus on the fact that U.S.-South Korea relations have become all the more important with the recent changes in international relations, particularly with the Ukraine war and then emerging Russia, China, North Korean sort of alignments. And so let me just first go over more historically before we come to the present time. So I basically divide the entire relations between the U.S. South Korea into basically 2, but more or less 3. One is the Cold War period, and then so the second one, the post-Cold War. Third one is probably globalization or de-globalization era. So as everybody probably know, during the Cold War period, basically the relationship was one-sided, totally South Korea's total dependence on the United States. I mean, not only economic but also in military fields, even politically speaking. South Korea indeed was, I mean, almost totally dependent upon the United States. So at the time, of course, the United States was a dominant, hegemonic country of the Western Hemisphere. So basically I mean, right after the Korean War, actually, as I said earlier, in 1953, military alliance was concluded between the two sides. Since then, the alliance actually has remained in effect even up to this point. So nothing much really to say other than this dependent relationship during the Cold War. But then with the beginning of the post-Cold War, actually some things began to change in the relationship. Particularly during the Cold War period, South Korea began to change completely in terms of the economic development. So in 1960, South Korea's personal GNP per capita, I mean, was meager $80. Now, as of 2022, it hovers around $38,000. So you see how much change has occurred throughout for the last several decades. So rapid the industrialization. Of course, behind this economic success obviously lied the U.S. factor. Indeed, Cold War period was very interesting in that there was frequent trade-offs between security needs and economic needs. So U.S. security interest in South Korea, for example, United States side asked South Korea to dispatch Korean troops to Vietnam War, and in return, the United States opened its own market to South Korean products. So I think the Cold War period is very interesting in that regard, meaning frequent trade-offs between security and the security and economics. So that era obviously has long ended since the end of Cold War. But against this background, South Korea was able to make economic progress. That I have to emphasize that. And then the South Korea began to diversify its international relations with the former socialist countries like China, the Soviet Union, now Russia, and then other the previous Eastern European countries, communist countries. And so however, the most distinct the change in the post-Cold War period was exactly the rise of China, not only for the United States but particularly for South Korea. Let's see there. Yeah. Let me see where is it. Okay, let me just always by PPT. Let me see. Yeah. All right. Somehow something's missing, but let me just continue. I will come up with something. But so let me see there. So excuse me. All right. Okay. So in the globalization period, actually, as you recall, there's some kind of causal relationship between the United States and China without much conflict, and also heavy economic engagements on the part of the United States with China. At the same time, similar thing happened to Korea, as we see here. We'll see shortly about that. That is during the globalization period, China also opened itself up to the world market, including that of the United States, and then increasing economic interaction between South Korea and China. I mean, you'll come. That PPT will come shortly. So let me just go along this PPT here. Then, what is the current status of U.S.-Korean relations? So, opinion polls. It's quite positive. 77% of South Koreans hold a very positive view of the United States. 71% regard U.S. as a reliable partner for their security. Also, on the American side, 75% of Americans hold also a very positive view of Korea, versus negative only 7.8%. But it contrasts quite well with the opinions of China in Asia Pacific region. Major countries for example, in North Asia or the Asia Pacific, Japan, 85% actually hold a negative view of China. In South Korea, 63% of South Koreans also hold a very negative view of China, while in Australia that is 57%. So overall, at the current, I mean, if you look at the current status of the bilateral relationship, actually it is quite good. It has been good, although, as I will remark at the later point, with the democratization in South Korea, actually depending upon the regimes, the slightly different sort of posture toward the United States, but that doesn't mean that there's a strong anti-American tendency in South Korea at all. So that's the general sort of overview of current status. How about bilateral trade then? So U.S. goods and services trade with Korea, actually in 2019, $168 billion is quite large. So Korea is currently U.S. sixth largest goods trading partner. Okay, and then the South Korea was the U.S.'s seventh largest good export market. So in other words, overall trading versus good export only. So virtually same thing. So you see, now South Korea has grown, has developed so much. From total dependent country to more or less now mutually kind of cooperative kind of relationship, kind of change. Also, U.S. for South Korea, U.S. number one in import, number two in export kind of country. So overall, even economic area is quite mutually very important to each other. Okay? So this is the current status, same thing. I mean, the volume of trade, even compared to 2019 that I just mentioned, now it's sort of more for the increasing tendency in economic relationship. So about the recent announcement on investments on the part of South Korea. So as I said probably earlier, U.S. number one foreign direct investment country for Korea. So $118 billion in 2020. In contrast, China is number two, $9.4 billion. Also, in recent years, or even as late as last year, 4 major South Korean companies, including Samsung, SK, announced plans to invest $39.4 billion in the United States. So, for example, Samsung Electronics announced plans to invest $17 billion in a new foundry plant as part of a semiconductor industry development project in the United States. LG Energy Solution and SK Innovation also announced $14 billion. So, I mean, there is even at this point very active the kind of economic relationship. So let me just go to the then security situation here. So as you all know, since the 1953, this DMZ actually has remained same. I mean, no change at all. In fact, even now between South and North Korea, no officially sanctioned as even correspondence exchanges, even now. And so it's very sorry and a sad situation. In fact, my mother personally, at the personal level, actually, who passed away last year, at the age of 96, and she came down from North Korea, and she had not been able to make any contact for the last 60 years or something. So that's a very tragic situation still going on. So it's a symbolic. I just try to show you. So, although many of you know about this, but somehow just in passing, just try to show this DMZ kind of situation. And then the U.S. troops. I mean, close to 29,000 U.S. troops actually still stationed in South Korea, all over the place, like this one here. Okay, so there is the the strong kind of security sort of commitments on the part of the United States to the stability of South Korea or the Korean Peninsula entirely. So once again, this mutual defense treaty was concluded in 1953. So basically, let me see this. Let me just see the whole thing here. Okay, so the main point about the alliance is this: the two parties will maintain and develop appropriate means to deter armed attack. That's the first point. Second point is the two sides will meet the common danger in accordance with its constitutional processes. That is the different. It's a fundamental difference between NATO and then U.S.-Korean military alliance. In the case of NATO, actually, it's an immediate response, regardless of constitution or whatever. But in the case of the U.S.-South Korean military alliance, this is a distinctive characteristic in accordance with its constitutional processes. Okay, so then there's some issue in particular area in terms of burden sharing, meaning to an extent the South Korean side would make a financial contribution to the cost expenditure related to the U.S. troops in South Korea. So it has been going on. It had been going on very smoothly up until the Donald Trump's administration. Actually, Trump proposed to raise 500% of burden sharing. So it raised eyebrows, obviously, on the part of South Korea. Although it was not realized as such, I think Trump's the policy actually caused a lot of uneasy feelings among South Koreans in terms of the U.S. The sort of policy or the attitude towards South Korea under Trump administration. But then in the meantime, with the coming of the Biden administration, actually the situation has improved quite rapidly. In recent SMA agreement, meaning special measures agreement regarding burden sharing, actually reached a very reasonable compromise between the two sides in terms of South Korea's contribution to labor, logistics, and construction with regard to the U.S. troops in South Korea. Okay, now, as I missed the earlier, let me just go. Then how about the U.S.-Korean relations under globalization and post-globalization? There's some new situation developed, obviously. Under the globalization, as I said earlier, U.S.-China relations began to develop more in depth. China is opening up and U.S. engagement. At the same time, deepening economic relations between China and Korea. Also, the news emerged, development of North Korean nuclear programs. So economically, it's sort of more or less flourishing, more or less quite rapidly developing. But North Korean nuclear issue always has been there since at least the late 1990s up until now, without any sign of ultimate resolution. So total volume with China, actually, as you saw there, figure is there, $301.5 billion, 2021, and then import export division, as you can see in the PPT. But then the point here is that 25% of total South Korean trade actually has been done with China. So the number one trading partner for Korea, number three for China. Although this kind of significant China for South Korean economy, South Korea has been trying to divert its economic, sort of if not dependency, sort of too heavy tilting toward China. They try to change it, but once relationships is built in, it's not easy to change. So it stays there that way so far. But then North Korean nuclear issue has been a thorny issue among the parties involved: China, South Korea, the United States, even Japan included. So, but then during the globalization period, North Korea started, expanded, and deepened nuclear programs. So in terms of nuclear fuel, nuclear bombs, and delivery system, missile system. But then at least there was, U.S.-China relationship, it was not was quite cooperative in dealing with North Korea. So that's the characteristic of the globalization period in terms of how to deal with North Korean nuclear issues. But then in the post-globalization era, U.S.-China competition and hegemonic rivalry started, as everybody knows by now. And then also pandemic crisis erupted. But then also technology security nexus issue emerged, and the economic security issue once again. Also, North Korean nuclear programs close to completion, particularly now with the Ukraine war. So totally new situation actually just began to unfold in terms of the U.S.-Korean South Korean relations. So new challenges, right? So international level, South Korea, U.S. are actually quite close to each other based upon the value alliance, meaning liberalism, democracy. In fact, I want to emphasize here at this point that South Korea actually, if you look around the region, Northeast Asia or even entire East Asia, I might want to emphasize that South Korea probably is a country in the region which is probably most westernized country, even more so than in Japan, than Japan. So South Korea joined in with the United States denouncing the Korean War, also provide some support to Ukraine. And then for the first time, South Korea was invited to NATO meeting in last year in Madrid. And also since the Biden administration, they came to the White House, the two summit meetings between the two leaders, between South Korean leader, President, and then President Biden. But then a possible issue actually could develop regarding Taiwan contingency, obviously. So amid the global turmoil, China may take adventurous military action to unify Taiwan by force. In case of Taiwan contingency, what should be the role of South Korea? That's going to be a very, very complicated issue here. but also if North Korea attempts to take advantage during the Taiwan contingency, Northeast Asia can become a regional hotspot. So these are obviously it's not imminent issue or challenge, but at least there's some kind of dormant kind of issues between the two countries. Okay, so another issue here is the U.S.-South Korean alliance and supply chain resilience. In other words, U.S. policy, as I'll be addressing shortly, because of this new situation that emerged between the United States, China, actually, that in turn is bound to affect U.S.-Korean relations. At a summit meeting, however, between the two presidents, they reaffirmed their commitment to cooperate in areas of advanced technology such as semiconductors, EV batteries, AI, quantum computing, and biotechnologies. So, am I going too long, or am I okay, or am I going
No,
too
you're
long?
good. You're
Right.
fine. We have until 8:30.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I'll be done very quickly. I mean, not too long.
No, this is good.
These coordination efforts align U.S. South Korean policies, but they may counter to the enormous volume of bilateral trade. What that means is that South Korean companies already made heavy investments. As I said here, 40% of South Korea's semiconductor export goes to China. So South Korea may face a conflict in the event the U.S. puts the pressure on South Korea to curb semiconductor exports to China that generate significant revenues for South Korea. Okay. For example, the Chips and Science Act in the United States is the major U.S. legislation impacting U.S.-Korean economic relations, as I said earlier. The CHIPS Act is designed to spur investment in U.S. semiconductor production through investment subsidies. However, the act also requires companies that accept the U.S. subsidies from refraining to expand the production of advanced semiconductors in China. U.S. policy on semiconductors is further shaping Korea's ability to maintain its semiconductor investment and do business in China. For example, Samsung and SK semiconductor investment in China actually respectively $17 billion and $24 billion. So the new U.S. law and policy might affect U.S.-South Korean relations. So another act, the Inflation Reduction Act, what they call IRA, significantly expands U.S. investment in clean energy. However, it also does so by creating a new requirements for the EV tax credits that are discriminatory toward, they may discriminatory towards South Korea. For consumers to be eligible for the 7,500 tax credit, the vehicles must now be built in North America. That's the issue. While Hyundai and Kia have announced they intend to build an EV assembly plant in the United States, it will not be operational until 2025. So in between, there could be some, but I understand that the United States actually, President Biden paid special attention to South Korean concerns. So now, as I heard, is in the process of being resolved. But the only issues are once again North Korean nuclear issues. So, for example, in last year, North Korea launched more than by now 100 missile tests, a record for the country. Several of them involved weapons of extraordinary range and potency. For example, in November, Hwasong-17 actually is intercontinental ICBM missiles that can carry multiple warheads and is capable of reaching the United States. That's the very alarming. the test of a powerful solid fuel rocket engine is another new development in North Korean nuclear programs. A crucial new capability for the country because solid fuel rockets can be fired more quickly than liquid fuel ones and are harder to detect and preempt. Also, they also are developing tactical nuclear weapons which may target South Korea, Japan, and Guam. So, but at the same time, given the new relationship, deteriorating relationship between China and the United States, diminishing China's input in North Korea's nuclear issues. Also, North Korea learned the hard lesson from the Ukraine war. It could fall victim to outside aggression if it gives up its nuclear weapons. So, putting all this together, with what would this mean is that it's going to be much more difficult and more complicated in reaching the goal of a complete denuclearization, so-called CVID, which has been U.S. basic policy line up until the Biden administration. Sign of instability in and around the Korean Peninsula by North Korea's provocation. And for example, drones are crossing South Korea's sovereign airspace. The last attempt by the United States to end the nuclear weapon program failed at the 2019 summit meeting, as you remember, in Hanoi between Kim and Donald Trump. And then the Biden administration has not come up with any new ideas on the issue so far, probably because of the Ukraine war. But at least the Biden Kishida summit meeting, the January this year, reaffirmed the complete denuclearization of North Korea. But new situation happening on the emerging on the horizon in South Korea. That is, of course, South Korea appealed to the United States to beef up extended nuclear deterrence. At the same time, for the first time, South Korean president alluded to the possibility or alluded to the nuclearization of South Korea. Of course, at this point, it's not realistic. But then I want to share with you, close to more than 70% of South Korean public actually agreed or affirms the possible nuclearization of South Korea. So now, although because of Ukraine war, somehow situation seems to be a little bit quiet, but at least there's some behind this apparent silence or quietness. Now, North Korea actually has been doing so many different things, not only against South Korea, but against or Japan or beyond. So this is going to be very, very difficult challenge. Now, prospects for U.S.-Korean relations. As I said, after all, the 70 years of military alliance is not kind of is very rare achievements. So I think based upon the 70 years of alliance, actually the relationship has matured in so many different fields. So basically, the relationship is to me is quite stable. Also, the shared values. As I said, South Korea is probably the most vibrant democracy in the entire East Asia. So deeply sharing democratic values and systems. So I think probably South Korea is a very rare, actually, of the case of U.S. foreign policy success. In fact, if you look around the world, you don't have any better successful case of U.S. foreign policy than South Korea. So I think the U.S. should be proud of its own success with the South Korean case. Particularly, what's so remarkable about South Korea is I mean, if you take a poll in South Korea, almost 80-90% of people support democracy. Although South Korea, the United States share this kind of high level of political polarization, still strong commitment to democratic values among South Korean people. To me, sometimes even sort of really surprised me this figure. What made South Korea South Korea committing so much to democratic values and system, I think basically it's influence from the United States, frankly. So I think this is a very good positive example. But then we have to understand the before we go to the last part, in passing, new administration just came to power less than a year already, almost 9 months. President Yoon had a strong commitment to U.S.-South Korea alliance, unlike the previous administration under Moon Jae-in, whose policy revolved around the North Korea. Now, Yoon Suk-yeol has been saying the U.S. The South Korean alliance is a pillar of South Korean foreign policy. So, but in passing, I want to show you this street demonstration in South Korea. So it's really very, I might say, too vibrant, so vibrant that it becomes sometimes chaotic. So this is the what's going on in South Korea nowadays. Now, my final word. The South Korean perceptions of the United States, I think I want to highlight here. South Korean people and society actually still holds a very positive view of the United States, as I already mentioned. But then some quarters of South Korean society start questioning, for example, what to learn from the United States from now on. You know, I mean, so. U.S. should be concerned with not only for South Korea but for itself deteriorating image of U.S. Since the financial crisis in 2008. So I even remember I surveyed several tens of the businessmen right after the financial crisis in 2008 in the United States. Actually, most of them prior to the crisis, they said that the model of capitalism was the United States. But then right after the financial crisis 2008, they said they began to doubt about that. So that's the I just want to leave you with this message. Second thing is I think that the United States actually they had been under the sense of hubris too long, too much, particularly during the Cold War. I mean, the fact that the United States won over the Soviet Union, actually that was the cause of hubris. So without sort of examining their own domestic situation in details, somehow lived under the rubric of hubris for too long. That's why globalization started without domestic preparation. As Roderick said, actually, Roderick said once that his question was, has the globalization gone too far? Indeed, I think it went too far. Those domestic conditions were not ready, according to Roderick, which I totally agree. Also, Richard Haas, the Council of Foreign Relations president, has been saying all along, U.S. foreign policy is about U.S. domestic politics. I mean, domestic economy, domestic affairs, to which I fully agree. And also, Donald Trump's sort of threat to withdraw U.S. troops actually left a very negative the sort of perception among some sectors of Korean society. And then U.S. position of South Korea, as I said, somehow unless you go to visit South Korea, you may not fully understand how much the country has changed. Indeed, it sometimes even surprises me. I mean, I visit quite frequently, but even during my visit, I was surprised to see the changes made in South Korean society and the economic systems. So I hope the United States first should be proud of their support to South Korea as a typical case of success. I mean, compared to Japan, obviously success case, but then South Korea did not go through war against the United States. And also South Korean democracy is more or less homegrown, not imposed, compared to that of Japan. So I think that South Korea should be more utilized on the part of the United States in disseminating democratic values and systems. In fact, there should be more cooperation. I want to add quickly that there's no country in the world that would emulate the U.S. Form of democracy, but more countries which can emulate South Korean example. So that's the point. So finally, now supply chains versus democratic value. So even under the same democratic value, there could be some hiatus in economic fields, obviously. But then, as I said earlier, the two countries actually based upon solid the foundation based upon 70 years of alliance. I think one or the other they will, and I don't see any real problem in resolving any conflict that might arise in the future. So with this, I would like to end my rather probably too long the sort of lecture. So I'm willing to listen to what you have to say about what I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ha, very much. And I will ask you to stop doing your screen sharing.
Yes.
Let's see if you can figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of questions in the chat,
Yeah.
and also one from my husband too, from Tom Rainey.
See that? Yeah. Okay. Stop here.
There
Yeah.
you go. There
Yeah.
you go. Okay. So, very interesting presentation, Dr. Ha, because as you mentioned, not many of us are paying enough attention to Southeast Asia and South Korea in particular, except if there's some kind of crisis. But I did have a question about the nuclearization of South Korea, as you mentioned, and how would that be perceived by the South Korean people, and especially this notion of constitutional process that you mentioned before, if there was going to be any kind of militarization that has to be connected to the constitutional process, what would South Korean people do?
Well, at this point, it hasn't reached the level of concern, frankly. It's some sectors of scholarly community actually has been throwing out this idea. In other words, I mean, logically speaking, to me, logically it makes sense because the increasing, as I mentioned, in fact, North Korean nuclear programs by now is almost complete. So they want to be sort of recognized as the formerly nuclear state. So North Korea, what North Koreans want is not about the denuclearization, but about arms control based upon their nuclear the capability. So, but then also they began to sort of violate they began to put pressure upon South Korea through the violation of mutual, let's say, the arms control, the agreement between the two sides. In fact, formally speaking, there is agreement of denuclearization between the two sides, but then not a single time, I mean, it has been complied. So, so increasing threat, the real threat from North Korea. And then also, according to some sectors of South Korea, they began to perceive that the United States may not be reliable partner because domestically sort of a lot of problems the rising in the United States. Also, the too many commitments the other than Korea. So they began to wonder what would be the best policy to defend themselves against North Korean provocations. So logically speaking, I think it's understandable that the idea of the nuclearization of South Korea is logically probably reasonable, but then practically or in terms of realism, it's almost impossible. Why? Because once South Korea start doing that, then they have to withdraw from NPT. As you all know, So by then, that means internationally South Korea will be isolated. And but then South Korean, as I said, trade dependency is almost the 80-90%. So without, it's almost like Denmark in Western Europe. So I would say also the United States the will not the sort of the sit. I mean will not allow or whatever recognize. So at this point, it's kind of thinking or idea or just kind of the throwing out stage. But then it may change quite quickly. The when and if the U.S. begins to be perceived as not a reliable partner. Okay.
Right.
So then Japan will go for nuclear. South Korea go nuclear. So it's going to be a nuclear nightmare in the region.
Yeah.
But then there is, what they said. I mean, those who argue for nuclearization said only then. I mean, with a fully nuclearized North Asia, they begin to negotiate. That's the logic of thinking. So overall, I say at this point, it's not going to be realistic.
I see. Okay. Well, let me ask a few more questions that came in the chat. There's one from one of our board members, Tony Usabelli. He said, can you say more about the viability of the North Korean economy? What do we know about North Korea's economy?
I would say this North Korean economy, nobody knows, obviously, but having as a person who studied the Soviet economy for a long time, originally I was trained as a Sovietologist, and then I used to say I became an academic orphan because Soviet Union disappeared. But I think it's really in dire conditions. In other words, I don't think even it's a planned economy anymore. It is a combination of a chaotic market system and then the partially state-controlled economy. But even then, because of the COVID-19, the pandemic, I think the country overall has become much more closed than before. In other words, officially, unofficially, used to be a lot of North Koreans across the Duman River, and then go over to China side, and then procured or secured the cheap consumer goods, and then they used to bring them back to North Korea.
Yeah.
But then that line of interaction obviously is quite much more sort of limited now because of pandemic. Although nowadays slightly, it's very slowly changing, but also domestically, of course there used to be. I mean, as you know, there has been ongoing heavy sanctions on by the United States, by the EU, by South Korea, by Japan. So also adding further problems. In fact, one of the major conditions of negotiation with Trump in Hanoi exactly was that. So they will give up the certain the Yongbyon region, the denuclearization of the Yongbyon region. In return, I mean in return they demanded the sort of the releasing the sanctions upon them. So sanctions, and then they further close the borders with China, and then ongoing shortage even prior to that. I think the North Korean economy is a really difficult situation. So that's why I have been maintaining the idea that we do not live only on nuclear arms. So if you look at the Soviet history, actually nuclear arms was one of the reasons for their failure, for the collapse, in fact. So unless nuclear weapons is supported by domestic economic political conditions, there is a limit to play a nuclear card. So once again, in answering to the question of North Korean economy, I think they barely make it. Barely making. In fact, some people already suspect the shortage of food this year, and then they may ask for outside help, frankly, and otherwise we may not. You may see some sign of. You may see some the larger scale the sort of the
Yeah,
hunger. So
very
I think yes.
good, interesting response. And another question from Charles Chelan and Norma. I think they lived in Korea, and
Yeah, I know him personally. So,
of course. And he has a question for you about realizing the troubled history between Japan and Korea. What are the long-term prospects and benefits for rapprochement?
that's a heavy duty question, and but I think the uh, this but everybody now is saying that with the resolutions of the sort of the confinement case and the forced labor case, if those two issues are resolved, then the relationship will rapidly improve. But I don't think so. I think the at the current at the only base for cooperation now is China's threat from China. But then there's a strong support from the United States. Equally, the each I mean the Japan and Korea have maintained the alliance relations with the United States for more than 70 years by now. So the as long as the two sides actually trust the U.S. credibility, then ironically, I don't see any strong need for cooperation. And to me, I think the overall, as you probably know, among the Japanese elites, very conservative Japanese elites, actually deep down level, they know the nature of U.S.-Japan relations would not be same as before, and so they now they think having long been thinking to be more or less autonomous. So I'm now differentiating three stages: total dependence, to independence, but in between autonomy. So meaning both two bilateral relations with China, meaning Japanese, U.S., Korean, U.S. should change from dependent to autonomous stage, not the independent stage. Meaning they first of all by independent meaning totally out of U.S. protection. But then at the stage of autonomy, both Japan and South Korea should be able to more flexible in their foreign policy, given the structural dependence on the United States. But as long as this dependent psychology continues, I don't think there's any need for two sides to cooperate. And then that's why I'm maintaining toward the South Korean side that is rather than talking about U.S.-China rivalry as a big factor for South Korean policy, first South Korean people and the society should change the security psychology. In other words, from total dependence to more or less flexible relationship with the United States. Likewise, Japan should be same. Otherwise, I mean, yes, Biden administration has been saying very close ties among the three countries, military cooperation or other things. But I maintain that it's high time to make a shift from total dependence toward more autonomy. If not independence, independence should come later.
Yeah, very interesting, this concept of dependency. There's one comment and not a question, and then the last question I have for you in a minute. So the comment was from Larry Seal that he and his wife Cynthia were hiking in Tiger Leaping Gorge in Western China in 2010, and they encountered hikers from South Korea. And when they learned they were from America, they said, "We love Americans," which underscores your comment that there's a positive attitude towards Americans.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And then a question from my husband here about the, maybe you want to say this about the Quad?
Quad
Yeah.
Alliance. And my question,
Could you explain what the Quad Alliance is for people that don't know that?
uh, it's an alliance, okay? Southeast Asia alliance that Professor Hawk could talk about. But do you see a strengthening of the Quad alliance and the extension of the Quad alliance and maybe the arming of the Quad alliance as a deterrent to Chinese expansion?
On the part of South Korea, actually, the South Korea has been hesitant to join the Quad militarily, but then as you know, the Indo-Pacific Economic Platform, South Korea has been willing to join. So in other words, still there's, unlike Japan, South Korea actually is much more dependent upon China, and so they are very much conscious of a China factor in formally joining Quad. But as I heard, actually, Quad actually the United States should pay more attention to Quad in terms of infrastructure and operations. So perhaps because of Ukraine war, I think now not many people even nowadays talking about Quad anyhow. But then I'm sure with the change in Ukraine situation, I'm sure the attention will shift back to this Asia, because as I can see, one of the unintended consequences of, or probably intended, I don't know, but of the Ukraine war is the kind of re-emergence of, as I said earlier, alignments among Russia, China, and North Korea. In fact, North Korea, as you must have read in newspaper, they even they were the first country which supported the Ukraine war. I mean, by the Russians. Also, there's rumor that they even sent some weapons or something to Ukraine war. So why? Because since the loss of a Soviet or communist bloc, North Korean the diplomatic sort of sphere of activity actually has been quite uncertain, limited. But with the re-emergence of alignment among the three, North Koreans would benefit most from this new alignment. That means I mean, against this kind of newly emerged the alignment, I'm sure it'll affect the Quad the activity. So we'll see how the change in Ukraine situation will affect the sort of strengthening of Quad the alliances.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And one last question here from Linda and George about how do the people of South Korea feel about the presence of US military and their active training along the DMZ?
Military training actually under the previous administration had not been active during the previous administration, but now under the new administration, also the president made a strong commitment to the resuming sort of a real military training. I mean, under the previous administration, probably computer-based, all this technical training, but now real training, particularly with the increasing frequency of North Korea's violations. I'm sure we're going to see more real military training from now on, based upon the mutual commitment on both sides. But then South Korean perception over the years actually diversified. So what they call progressive parts, their formal position about US troops used to be very negative. But I noticed that it's interesting. I have to say, it's sort of a little bit complex story. But let me say this: I usually take an analogy from the one father with the two sons analogy. In other words, it's quite often to see under the one father, two brothers totally maintain totally opposite view of their father, right? So one son really loyal and then respectful, but the other one totally rebellious, sort of against his father, something, right? I think that's the situation in Korea. In other words, the two sides, both the progressive and then the conservative, they, I mean, on the surface, they maintain totally opposite views. But deep down, they know, both sides know US commitment. So in other words, the two sons know that the father would never give up upon themselves. So that I want to draw upon that analogy.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
so I think the Americans should not be so much affected by what the so-called anti-Americanism among the Korean left is something.
Mhm. But as you mentioned earlier, the whole notion of dependency on the United States may be a bigger question.
Yes.
Yes.
That's all the long haul. That's going to be a very critical issue. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you, Professor Ha, very much. This
Thanks
is
very much.
so interesting, very informative, and makes us broaden our minds about Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much for your coming, and then
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
We will stay in touch.
Okay.
Good
Bye.
night.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.